celebrate a remarkable life of a person that was completely fearless and spoke truth to power, something that we all aspire to do. It is also an opportunity to think about the industry, introspection about where investigative journalism has taken us and where it could lead us to. And I think we have several prominent industry specialists, journalists who will speak on this panel today. It is also an opportunity to reflect on power, the structures that are supposed to deliver what we call accountability. It's an opportunity to ask the tough questions as to whether repeated governments have really fulfilled a commitment to bring the perpetrators of this heinous crime to account. We have a special surprise to start us off tonight, or this evening. We're going to have Lasantha's brother Lal speak to us for a few minutes via Skype. And then we're going to invite several speakers to the head table and begin this forum and panel discussion. Thank you. Let me begin by inviting Riza to speak a few words. You might have to use the podium. Riza, of course, is well known as the editor of Brown Views, but she also was once deputy editor of features at Sunday Leader, and she's, of course, Lasantha's niece. Riza, over to you.
Hello, everyone. I just wanted to start off by saying that it's fitting that we are marking 10 years since my uncle's untimely death by holding this forum in memory of something that I know was one of his deepest passions, investigative journalism. My sister and I would quite often joke that there was no surer way of seeing his prowess in investigative journalism than when he was trying to pry some kind of personal information out of us. For instance, any boy who happened to be texting us in the vicinity, the way he would pepper us with questions about name, interests, and hobbies, you could really see his prowess there. But on a serious note, I found the title of this forum quite suggestive. It suggests that a void and an absence. And indeed, Lasantha, or Papi as my sister and I call him, indeed there was an absence, not just in our personal lives, but also in the media landscape that he worked in. I think that it is a tribute in itself that there are so many experienced journalists who are speaking today at this panel, who have all worked with Papi at some point or the other, and many of them at the Sunday Leader. It is also true that the shape and form of journalism as we know it, as well as investigative journalism, has changed. I want to kind of reflect a little bit about why that change has happened, focusing on my personal experiences. So when I joined the Leader as an intern at 17 years old, I did not have any formal studies in journalism. I had not gone to journalism college. Everything that I learned on the job. And in that, I was really fortunate to have both Papi to mentor me and many other colleagues who taught me many of the technical aspects. How do you write a news story, and what's the difference between features and news? But there were also many things that I learned that did not come from formal study and was just learned on the job. And in some ways, when you look at the landscape today, I see some similarities. Often when I'm going to cover a media event, I will see a lot of young journalists around the table. And some of them are very curious and passionate and interested. But there are also some who don't seem to know about the topic that they're covering. And this is, again, not an indictment of youth. In fact, often we see when there are politicians who are speaking and when there are ridiculous statements made, that there's no questioning, there's no looking back at the context of what was said. So why is this? And is it easy, or is the only answer to point the finger at journalists themselves? I think we also have to look at the environment in which they work in. I know many of the speakers today have worked in newsrooms and will attest to the fact that it's a stressful environment. There's a lot of deadlines. There's content that has to be delivered on time. And on top of that, if you look at what investigative journalism means, what does it call for? I think it requires certain skills which actually do remind me of Bapi. In my opinion, investigative journalism requires curiosity. The curiosity to get to the bottom of a story no matter what. It requires tenacity to keep going despite many obstacles. It requires time and patience. And it does require research and in-depth reading. And sometimes I think, if you look at the current state of newsrooms today, you have to ask the question whether those values are being respected and upheld. Are our owners and newspaper editors investing in journalists? Are they encouraging the spirit of curiosity and tenacity? And you also have to balance that with the difficulties of running a business, a newspaper. Quite often what it results in is the need to publish content in order to sell copies in a way that is sensational. And that's sadly often the case. That's not to say that it is every case. Which brings me to the fact that I don't want to end on a note of doom and gloom. I don't want to say that, that investigative journalism is dead. I think that there are in fact many instances where we do see that spirit of curiosity and of tenacity. For instance, when the Right to Information Act was passed, we're seeing many journalists use it to ask questions, to creatively ask questions and to find facts that would otherwise not be uncovered. So I do think there are some bright spots. But this also brings me to my final and perhaps most important point, that for investigative journalism to really flourish and for this to really be encouraged, there has to be space for it to flourish. And that means that there has to be a system in place and a structure in place that encourages freedom of expression and does not clamp down on it. I think it's also, we have to reflect that we are standing here 10 years later and that we as a family are no closer to finding definitive answers to what happened and to who exactly was behind my uncle's death. And he's not the only one. There are many others whose deaths are not marked beyond friends and close family. And I think we have to reflect on that. And I hope, as my father said, that we move towards a time when this freedom of expression can be respected and upheld, and this spirit of curiosity can be fostered and encouraged by everyone, including the state. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak here. Speaking is not my forte, as I am a writer, but I just want to talk a little bit about, first of all, how I came to meet Lasantha and how I came to start working for him as a journalist, and also about how working for him, even though it was a very brief period, working for him seems to have, even unintentionally and without my knowledge, influenced the rest of my life in newspapers. So I met Lasantha and I started working at the Sunday Editor as a result of a certain kind of constitutional coup. That meant I could no longer work at Lake House and I had to find another job. That was not the recent one that we all remember, but the one that happened in November 2003 when President Lasantha Wickrematunge seized 3 ministries from Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe, including the media ministry. So I ended up at the Sunday Leader as a sub-editor, and so it had been maybe 2 months into learning sub-editing under Ramesh Wickremesinghe's guidance. I think Ramesh is here, and I have to say, I'm really grateful for that time because sub-editing is like, it's a dying art, and he taught me so much that has stayed with me right throughout. But a few months into this, there was an opportunity to go sabbatical with a senior journalist, and I am still to date a bit of a rusty on the case. So I love to travel, and this assignment excited me, even though I was not technically a writer. And I asked Lasantha if I could go, and he readily agreed. And this poor senior journalist who was probably cursing to have to take this completely green reporter off to a war zone, even though it was a ceasefire. I went, and he allowed me to write 1 copy in this big kind of assignment diary spreads that Lasantha used to allow his journalists to do. And it appeared in the Sunday Leader that Sunday, and then on Tuesday, Lasantha called me into his room and said, you know, why are you a sub-editor? And I was like, that's the job. And he said, you should be writing. You should be writing. This is clearly what you're supposed to be doing. And at the time, I was kind of terrified of seeing my name in print. I've always been a writer, always been a scribbler, but it's a whole other thing to put your name to an article and have it published and take all that responsibility for it. So, so he insisted that I start writing for the Leader, including while I also did my sub-editing duties. And so Lasantha is not just he's not just my first editor. He is also probably the first person who realized that this is what I was made and meant to do with my life. And so for that, forever I will be grateful, because 15 years later I'm still here and I'm still doing this, and there's nothing else I know to do. So in terms of how Lasantha's, those months at the Sunday Leader really kind of shaped me, was that I continued to go out on assignment, I continued to write. The tsunami happened, I did coverage that I never thought I would have to do in my life. I saw things I never thought I would have to see, but all of that happened, and to date, my preferred form of writing, and that is something that I think Lasantha gives so much space to his reporters, was to go out, leave Colombo, go out, really kind of talk to people, feel the pulse, come back. You know, your writing changes completely when you do that. And I think he knew that, because he would just send us off, and I don't think Leader had a huge budget or anything, but he would just send us off. And that I've continued throughout my career, and I think that's something that every journalist would benefit from if they had the kind of capacity and desire to do it. In terms of investigative journalism, which is the subject of this forum, I worked very briefly on an investigation desk with Fredrika Jans, who took over the Sunday Leader after Lasantha was killed. And I wasn't, to this day, I don't consider myself a really investigative journalist. I think my strengths lie elsewhere. But one thing I do remember about Lasantha is that he would give us a story. He would give us a story idea and say, you know, this is happening in this place, and go figure out what that is and write about it. And there have been times when I've come back and said, no, Lasantha, it's not like this. In fact, it's something else, and it's completely different, and it's not nothing like you said. And I couldn't believe the fact that, there's always this criticism of Lasantha that he